And a very good morning to you. 9:33 the time now on this beautiful Sunday. Gorgeous day to explore the state of California and all it has to offer. As Patty and I mentioned earlier in the show, there is some fire concern around the state today. Dry lightning may spark off some wildfires. We certainly hope not, but moisture moving up from Mexico could create flash flooding in the mountains of Southern California. In other areas, it could be dry lightning, which is not good because there's no rain to put it out.
And some windy conditions.
Exactly. So we are in the dry season for sure. California has that Mediterranean climate. We go months on end without a drop of rain in many cases. We wait around until October, November before we get our first storms that roll through. And then if we're lucky, the storm door opens, as the meteorologists say, and we have a series of storms that hit mainly December, January, February, and then start to taper off as we head in through spring, and then it can be dry from end of May all the way through late September, early October. So we're used to it because we lived through it. However, if that storm door does not open, then we find ourselves, as we did this past winter, with very dry conditions. And we were lucky. We got some rain. It didn't fall in its normal pattern. January was extremely dry, but then in the spring, we picked up a bit, which was good. We got some of that much-needed snow in the Sierra that is money in the bank, and but we did not hit a what would be considered a normal year, I guess. But we did have an extremely wet year the year before, so we were in a good place for all of that. However, California has experienced severe drought over the years, including in the mid to late 70s. I remember that all too well. And then we had things like stickers on the toilet that said "Blush, don't flush,"
right?
And and little things like that. And so over time, people learned to conserve water. Low flow shower heads.
Right.
I moved to the Midwest and brought my low flow shower heads with me because when I moved into my apartment, I couldn't believe the torrent of water that was coming out of this shower head, and I thought I just wasn't used to it, and I felt wasteful.
Don't you people conserve water around here?
It takes a lot of energy to make water and to ship it around and get it from A to B where it might be stored to your faucet. So it's not just about how much water you have. There's energy involved as well.
And you were mentioning here in California, we go through these droughts, and yet we're right on the coast. And
right. You look at all this water and you think, how can we be a drought-ridden state?
So, the famous rhyme of the Ancient Mariner? Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. That's what you think of when you look at the ocean, and you think, but we're not using it.
Right, because it's full of salt. But there are ways where you can remove the salt from the water. They're called desalination plants. Desalination has been around for centuries. And to speak about this topic is Heather Cooley with the Pacific Institute. She has put together a number of papers over the years addressing this topic from all angles. Some people like what she has to say, other people don't. But as I have looked at her information, it seems pretty well balanced. I think she's really looking at every angle of it, and she joins us right now live on the phone. Hi, Heather.
Hi, how are you?
Fantastic. Thank you. And I saw a report by the Pacific Institute that came out this summer regarding the state of projects, desalination projects in California. And I was stunned by the number that are planned, I guess you would say, for the Central Coast.
Yes, there are a number of plants, about 17 plants proposed for the California coast, and then 2 plants proposed that are in Mexico, but that would provide water for the Californians.
Currently operating desalination plants in California are far and few between right now and not very large.
That's correct. We have a couple of very small plants, mostly designed for industrial purposes, so for power plants or for other sorts of industrial facilities. We have 1 or 2 plants that are designed for meeting drinking water needs for sort of residential communities. There is one specifically in Sand City that was recently constructed and built, one down in Avalon on Catalina Island. We have built plants here in California. Back in the previous drought in 1992, we built a plant in Santa Barbara. That plant was successfully completed. It was able to make water, to produce water, but the rain started as soon as the plant was completed, and that plant was never actually used. It was just put into long-term standby mode.
Is the desalination plant still working at the Monterey Bay Aquarium?
Yes, there is one there. It provides a small amount of water, mostly for flushing toilets and for other purposes around the aquarium.
Now, Heather, some people look at the information that you provide and tag you as an opponent to desalination, but you don't like that title.
No, I don't. I think there are issues associated with seawater desalination. I think there are some advantages and some disadvantages, and I think it's important that we talk about what those are and ensure that we're building plants that are appropriate, that are appropriately designed and appropriately sited. And so I think it's important to understand what these issues are and to make our decisions based on the best available information.
So, Heather, I believe Cambria here along the Central Coast is one of the places that has talked about, proposed a plan for, they have some water issues up there, so they proposed the desalination plant. What seems to be the obstacles for these communities to get that process moving forward? I just feel like that's been something that's been talked about for such a long time.
So there are a range of issues, and it varies depending on where you are in the state. There are plants that are currently permitted but have not been built, and the issues there are more around financing. Desalination plants are expensive, and so it can be difficult to get all of the money in place, essentially. In other communities, at least in the short term, there isn't as much of a need at this time. The economic downturn combined with some of the conservation and efficiency improvements that have been achieved in the past couple of years have depressed demand. So in many cases, communities have enough water for now, and so many communities are more in the planning phases. So I mentioned that there were 17 proposed in the California coast. Those are at various stages. Some are in more of the, doing the pre-feasibility studies. Others are more actively doing the environmental impact reports and are seeking permits.
Is there a concern that if we have water now, so people aren't really aggressively moving forward with an alternative like desalination, is there a concern that when it becomes an issue, we're not going to be ready for it if another drought happens?
Well, desalination plants can be built fairly quickly, and so it's important that communities plan for it and begin thinking about when they're going to need it. But I think the question of when and how are important questions. Again, I think planning is important, but when the plant needs to be built, it can be built relatively quickly.
Now, Heather, once the plant is up and running, there are a few issues there as well, right? They're expensive to run primarily because of energy, if I understand correctly, the energy to process the water, and then there are some environmental concerns?
Yes, that's correct. So desalination plants use a large amounts of energy. In fact, they're among the most energy-intensive water supply that available. And so because of that, they produce greenhouse gas emissions, which of course are a concern because of climate change. It also, though, increases vulnerability to energy price increases over time, both short-term and long-term. So typically in California, we do produce electricity using hydropower. So if there is a drought, generally energy prices go up, and that can, in the short term, increase the cost for seawater desalination. In addition, as we are starting to put on some of the more expensive energy sources, that can increase long-term energy costs and, again, raise the price of seawater desalination.
And it takes chemicals to process this water completely, and then once you remove all the salt and all that sort of thing, that has to get dumped back into the ocean with these chemicals. That's another one of the environmental problems?
Yes, so there are environmental concerns both in the withdrawal of seawater from the ocean and the disposal of the brine. So in terms of the withdrawal, water is taken into a desalination plant, and small organisms can pass through the intake screens and are killed during the desalination process. Larger marine organisms can get caught on the intake screens and can be killed. So those impacts are referred to as impingement and entrainment.
But there's also some environmental positives, right?
Potentially. There is the opportunity, some have argued, for returning water to rivers and streams that we have withdrawn too much water from in the past, and so a potential to restore those systems. Unfortunately, there aren't very many legal mechanisms to ensure that that actually occurs. There are cases, for example, on the Carmel River, where there's a requirement to return water to the stream there, and therefore any water produced, whether it be through conservation, recycled water, or desalination, would on a one-to-one basis reduce withdrawals of water from that river. And so in that case, there can be an environmental benefit.
So one of the concerns that you were talking about a few moments ago is the energy that is needed to run a desalination plant. So is there any thought to make it a partnership with solar power? Is solar power something that would give off enough energy to run or even help run a desalination plant?
Definitely. There are ways of powering desalination using renewable energy systems, either through solar or, I've seen more commonly, through wind power. Australia is an example. Australia experienced some very severe droughts over the past 10 years, did build desalination plants. They were concerned about the greenhouse gas emissions and therefore powered some of their desalination plants using wind from a nearby wind farm.
Oh, that's great. Heather Cooley with Pacific Institute. Lots of great information. I highly recommend people watch the YouTube video of you online, and we'll put a link to it on the eDrink Explorer website where you address all of these things and more. Heather Cooley, Pacific Institute, thank you so much for joining us to talk desalination today.
Thank you.
And we're back in just a moment. It's Coastal Cleanup time once again.